Welcome, everyone, to the Heaven and Earth podcast. I am your co-host, Matthew Merlin.
And I'm Crystal.
So today, the moon is in Virgo, forming an opposition to Saturn. This is an interesting placement. The whole sign conjunction with Venus and Mercury is great for communication and dialogue, but we're hoping that this opposition from Saturn brings up some deeper topics and deeper discussions, especially since Denise here is a clinical psychotherapist.
And
Yeah.
Denise is also so many other things too.
Mhm.
Just like the plant ally that Denise and I have decided today is going to be kind of holding space and guiding our conversation, which is the delicious and anciently potent rosemary. So rosemary is a plant that is something not a lot of people know, and an interesting uh, jumping off point for our conversation here is classically actually a plant of death, is a psychopomp plant, right? Was found in the tombs of ancient Egyptian pharaohs, and is classically associated with memory, right? In the head, worked with for migraines, worked with for conditions of the head, excellent for the nervous system, right? But in that rosemary for remembering, right? Like rosemary helps us to connect with. Right, connect with our ancestors, those who are past, or those who are just in the realms of the ethers, awaiting for us to hear them. And that this is work that Denise does beautifully, and would love to hear how Rosemary has been sitting with. How has Rosemary been sitting with your work recently?
Well, I have to say, it was probably about a year ago when you opened a rosemary diet,
Ah,
maybe it was a year ago. And I had worked with her more in terms of traditional clearing, like as a
mm,
smudge.
yeah.
Um, and I had never done a diet with her. And I have basically been dieting with her ever since that. So thank you to you, Crystal, because I found a really profound ally, and both in terms of an ancestral ally for me, but also with this work that I do that is essentially a kind of psychopomp.
Mm.
Um, and and so it's been incredibly soothing and clarifying ally and companion for this past year in particular. So she was the first one I thought of when we talked about, just because she's such a dear friend. So
Mhm.
yeah.
Beautiful, beautiful. And so, would this be a good place to jump into? Would you like to tell us a little more about your work? You work in such a fascinating cross section of these, really potent and needed healing modalities in our time, right? You're a clinical psychotherapist. You were trained at, um, I think, one of the most fascinating psychology departments in the country. And but simultaneously, right, you were training in shamanic journey work. Would you like to speak to that, speak to what that was like and how
Yeah.
that path has been for you?
Um, well, I will say that I'm certainly not someone who has had a direct path of any kind. It's been many spirals, I would say. But so the way that these all kind of came together for me, and I'll just kind of say that I've always had a difficulty sort of positioning myself within one discipline only, because the intersections feel so natural and fluid.
Mhm.
So in particular, I was a kid who really spent a lot of time in solitude and nature and also making things. And so I feel like my first kind of love and engagement with the world and ability to sort of start to work with bringing the dream time into form
Mhm.
um, was really through creative making. And like many things that we learn through experience, there may not be a language for it until much later in our lives. But all
Right.
I knew was that it was really important to me to have that somehow in my life. So I'd usually have very special places under bushes and things I'd go and spend a lot of hours in and doing that kind of making. And started to have this real communication with what you all talk about so beautifully, this communicative web of the natural world that's always seeking connection and communication with us. So that has felt like a through line for me in my life, of like the foundation and the heart has been that, whatever that practice is of listening and then responding with materials in a way that in some ways has seemed as though it's really been about making what is invisible otherwise visible.
Yeah.
But sometimes it's also just amplifying what's already there in a stone or in a branch or whatever it may be. So I really pursued art. That was my main love and first love and passion.
So that was your first
It
love.
still is.
It still
Yeah,
is.
very much.
Okay.
But I had to choose a thing to also do. And I went to art school, and I ended up teaching art at Duquesne. And I was
Oh, wow.
teaching a drawing class. And I had done an undergraduate as well in phenomenological psychology at Duquesne as well. So I had a good bit of experience there, but I really wanted to pursue the art because it felt like that could be a way of supporting or healing that had a different language to it. Let's say it had to me, it was a ready to hand kind of medium of expression. But when I was in art school, I was in New York City, and it was 2000 to 2002 at that time. And so I was living in Brooklyn, and this is when September 11th happened in 2001. And so I was there with several other friends watching the towers go down. Because if you're familiar with Brooklyn, it's right across the river from the World Trade, where the World Trade Centers were. And to be there in that time was really life-changing for me, because it really was a tower experience for me. I mean, I was really hoping to be in some way on primarily an artist path, but then when this happened, there was a real kind of reassessment for me about how I could be of service in other ways too. And so at that time, it was interesting living there, because a lot of the conversations in the rest of the country were like, go shopping in New York and support New Yorkers. And there was seeing it on TV, but actually living there, the whole city, well, at least that part of Manhattan, was covered in this gray dust. Everything was covered in this dust. So we're talking about a very Saturn experience where everything becomes this gray ash. And in the early days, they hadn't blocked things out, so you could really get very close. And there was a lot of people that I knew at that time that left, that really couldn't be in the city. It was too many ghosts, really. And this is when I started to really become more consciously attuned to some of the spiritual needs of when trauma, like at a collective scale like that, happens. I had been working and tracking since adolescence in my art, something that now I think of as ancestral suffering. But at the time I was like, these images are just coming to me and I'm putting them down. And it was a continual kind of going back again and again to themes of genocide and obsession with genocide, and researching that and how that was getting processed in the art. So when September 11th happened, and there were all these people that came in, not only, to try to help medically, but then all these people came in afterwards that had spiritual skills that were helping to psychopomp and assist the souls that needed help. And so that really opened that up for me, because it was a language that started to give form and structure, really, to the experience of all that we are a part of, in both visible and invisible ways, in a very practical way. And so it started to kind of really put me into this stream, I guess, of seeking out teachers, shamanic teachers, to try to understand, well, what can we do? How do we assist when, spirits need help or souls get stuck
Right.
through a death process that may be traumatic or unexpected, or and then when I was teaching at Duquesne in the art department, I had a veteran who was in between his second and third deployment to Afghanistan.
Wow.
And what he was working through in his self-portraiture was so, it moved me so deeply in the heart to want to be able to be of service in return, because the dismemberment process that he was going through as a result of exposure to that conflict and war in general in that particular way was so dismembering psychically. And he was going to be going back for his third deployment. And he made a drawing of himself that he laminated so he could keep it, like a little picture of it in his pocket, so he could keep looking at it in case he needed to remember himself.
Wow.
So that's when I decided, okay, I think I need to go back and pick up some more skills. So I went into the PhD program at Duquesne, and then had the good fortune of meeting a lot of people along the way who were doing this kind of interesting shamanic integration with psychotherapy, particularly in the realm of working with veterans. So that's how it kicked off. It was a series of circumstances.
So I would love to hear more about that integration between psychotherapy and shamanic practice.
Yeah, well, yeah, Matthew. Well, like I think the biggest thing, because there's so many ways we could talk about that or examples, is that generally the mainstream clinical psychology in particular, or even counseling psychology, is still very much about thinking of the practice and the discipline about the mind, and the loss of the understanding that psyche is a word for the soul. And so originally the psychotherapios would have been the caretaker or the doctor of the soul. And so our origins, at least our Western origins of psychotherapy, are with Asclepios. And that understanding that most issues that present are actually have a spiritual basis of some kind. But mainstream psychology has been quite nervous to even touch anything related to the spiritual. And I found too that a lot of spiritual communities are often blatantly very struggling with some psychological issues.
Oh yeah.
They're not being recognized. So
Yes.
the integration of the two, I think, is really profound. And I found, for me, the primary way that I integrate it is really meeting every person with a much broader frame of who's coming into the room and what they're coming with, especially in terms of who their ancestors are,
Right.
what energies are with them, how we can think of it a bit more systemically, whatever the presentations are. And over time as a practitioner, when I see things over and over and over with different individuals, I've become really interested in looking at, well, what's under that? What is the root that ties all that together? And in my own work and path and understanding of it that is evolving, there are some threads that are consistent. Some of them include the lack of ancestral practices, a lack of understanding how to assist the death process. So we have a lot of stuck ancestral energy that needs help, and that people are carrying without knowing that and identifying with it. So that's a really big one. Another one is the land, relationship with the land. So, you know, the recognition of what the exchange energetically has been for us to be here and what our relationship is with the land as a primary loss of rootedness that can look like any number of diagnoses, right, on the surface. But when you go deeper, there's often that sense of this really ambivalent or tenuous sense of belonging. And so these are things that, you know, in shamanic perspectives and communities, and there aren't many intact ones anymore, but as you know, but
Yeah.
as far as kind of the sensibility of belonging to a web of life with an animistic perspective, that we are not the only beings that matter on this planet as humans, and that that we are within a stream of ancestors, that when we start to look at it through those lenses, often some of these patterns start to shift or settle in ways that addressing them as this is only your problem and only your pathology, let's say, and that it exists somehow in this weird sort of bubble in which your personal experience and the personality is primary. One of the things I love about how you teach astrology, Matthew, is that you're really, I hope I'm not misinterpreting this, but that perspective of it's not all about us. Like there are other, there's a web of relationships and gods and forces that we are in relationship to. And so that idea that everything is about me, that highly subjective, you know, privileging of that layer of self is actually quite overwhelming and a burden for a lot of people.
Oh yeah.
Looks like anxiety for most people on some level. So the integration has to me a lot more to do with this principle of hospitality to what's there.
Ooh. I like that.
That's really good.
Yeah.
I like that.
Yeah.
Totally.
And it does bring in phenomenology, of course.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that, you know, it seems like the phenomenological psychologists are much more open to giving some kind of real being to something like the unconscious, or or a dream, or an experience that people would have of an ancestral curse. Because even if it, you know, you can't run a test on it or something like that, it's real for them. It's real, like they're having a genuine experience of it. And when you acknowledge it in and of itself, I think there's more opportunity for healing, just practically speaking.
Yeah.
So it's like the universe placed you. I'm just like, I'm stunned by your story, right? So you're like starting out as an artist, you witness this, you know, peak crisis moments, right? Of the towers falling. Like, I mean, that's such a huge like call to being initiated, right? And into this work. And then you find yourself at teaching art at what is one of two phenomenologically based psychology programs in the country. And that was just serendipitous, or because that's incredible. Like that's one of the only programs you could have been at that would have enabled such a fluid integration of these two ways of viewing. Because like Matthew said, it's like phenomenology really was/is the, you know, that entry point into being able to give weight, right, to our experiences of interconnection with the realm of the invisible. Would you say that's true?
Yeah, I mean, there's such a beautiful way of saying it, Crystal. And if I mean, one of my favorite phenomenologists is Merleau-Ponty,
Yeah. Yeah.
who really took it into quite a mystical place in his later works. But you know, at its core, for anybody who's never heard of phenomenology before, it's a philosophical tradition that began with Hegel and then Heidegger. I think that's
Hmm.
right,
Yeah.
Matthew.
Yeah. Yeah.
So started with continental philosophers who were really seeking to return to the things themselves. So rather than kind of applying a theory about something, you know, to kind of fit, and which is very relevant to psychology and psychiatry, because we have a lot of theories that that if you're coming with that, it's not that hard to try to fit people in there. And in fact, that's generally what's expected. But if you're coming from a phenomenological perspective, it is this orientation fundamentally to allowing what is to appear and to communicate to you. So there's an emphasis on description rather than interpretation, per se. So the description, a deep description, let's say, of a tree, opens that being up to a place of really wonder. I mean, if you really sit with a tree and you really try to describe all the majesty and the intricacy and all that, it's not long before you know, we are humbled by that. And that's so different from I'm going to interpret what I think that it is.
Mhm.
Or you know, recruit you to join my interpretation. Um, so there's a certain there is a place for interpretation within phenomenology that's more of a hermeneutic process that has to do with a kind of awareness of what the observer, so to speak, is bringing in an embodied, holistic way that is never separate. You know, so it really what has been a philosophy that's questioned this idea that you can be this totally objective observer looking at the world and understanding the world. And really, particularly for psychology, which is really a human science that has to do with human experience, the kind of understanding that we need a way or ways in that are more about evocation and invitation and hospitality and being open to being surprised or changed or moved ourselves. That's how I like to talk about phenomenology, but
That's beautiful. Yeah. That's very good.
Do you think that there's something in that? Because something else that you said that really intrigued me that I would love for people to think a little more about is the inherent sickness
Mm.
of individualism,
Mhm.
right? And how you see that in your practice and how you see your work. I mean, you've spoken to it already in some ways, right? Like they helping people to connect to the deep
Mhm.
into the profound web of being all around us, right? Like in the material, what we can see, like trees, other humans, and also
Mhm.
with our ancestors. But I think a lot of people, especially in the US, right? It's like our individualism, we've been shaped so much by that. Like could you speak a little more to how you would help somebody to unwind that?
So, as you were speaking, there was an image that came up that I would like to share as a entry point to this. Um, so one of the oldest known settlements in old Europe and kind of Near East, and would be in Anatolia, is Catalhuyuk.
That's
And this was about 6,000 BC. And there's a lot about this kind of older Neolithic time and the Paleolithic as well that preceded it that we just because we don't have a lot of writing,
Mhm.
we tend to just say, well, we're going to interpret it from our modern mind's perspective, right? So we tend to look at it through that lens, or at least that's how it's been. But this particular settlement, which was part of what the archaeologist Maria Gumbutas has really, her whole body of work has really shown us, and that has now been, confirmed with DNA evidence and all that, is that there was a very long time of matristic cultures that existed before about 4000 BC. That there were cultures that while there were certainly tools that look like weapons, there weren't mass productions of things that would entail larger warfare that were found in the archaeological digs. In most of the settlements, they, like Catalhuyuk, they look like beehives. So all the houses are like these interlocking chambers that overall form a larger shape or a larger outline, but it's all basically, all the houses are connected. And, each maybe smaller family group presumably had their own little cell, let's say, or, their sanctuary in many cases, but they were all connected. And this is a consistent image that we see across old Europe. And I bring that up because a lot of us who are of European ancestry have sought out spiritual lineages or traditions from other ancestral bloodlines because we feel that we don't have any of our own. But like Gumbutas's work and others, if we look back far enough, there's actually quite a unified picture of a mother goddess culture that existed for thousands of years. And that really, really in the Neolithic time, particularly in the Bronze Age, like produced all of those, so many of these figurines that we have now across everywhere from, quite far in the West, all the way into the Middle East. And that. But these images of these collectives in which there is an individual space within a larger hive. This is something that, because I think that the psyche is iconographic. In other words, we think and process in images, and images can carry healing that words don't necessarily carry in the same way. Meditating on the images of the kinds of ways that we knew how to live, in which it wasn't an either or, like I'm enmeshed and I have no individuality, nor am I completely alone, right? So there's all these different kinds of structures actually that are part of our Earth's memory that show a way of living together and also having, so to speak, a sanctuary for oneself. And the ways in which this translates now, I think, is really, really profound, because we do have such a seeking of community, that need for there to be a sense we're not doing this alone. We can't actually do it alone. As much as we want to move to the mountains and be hermits, we're here, right? This is where it's at. So we gotta, and this is, Gumbutas actually has a quote that's something like, the goddess went into hiding in the mountains, but she is coming back from the mountains now.
Ooh,
and
wait, whose quote is that again?
Gimbutas.
This is from
Right?
Gumbutas.
Okay.
Lithuanian ethnographer who she did a lot of excavations and stuff.
Yeah, and this was the inspiration for founding Mountain to Mountain, which is the other kind of body of work that the place where I've kind of put what I feel like is more addressing the question that you have, Crystal, which is more outside the realm of psychotherapy proper, because although within the psychotherapy container, there is this really countercultural need to have some sanctuary space for one-on-one care of the soul.
Mhm.
We have such a massive collective challenge that I actually have become very interested in like what are the containers that actually provide that in a bigger way, or that speak to this deep soul longing to remember what is real.
Yeah. Could you tell us
And
about those containers?
yeah, yeah. Um, so one of them is the prayer tent for the Divine Mother,
Yes.
which was is a traveling I don't know even what to call it. It's kind of like a spaceship these days because it's traveling in different places, and it contains 13 banners of life-size um, spirits, paintings of spirits that wanted to be painted. And when it first started a few years ago, it was just before COVID shut down, and I was feeling really burned out by doing some different work with first responder groups, and it was just things were kind of coming to a head with a feeling of we have really divided the feminine. We have the repression of what the feminine in her fullness can bring to our psyche has been really split off, and there's consequences to splitting things
Yes.
off, right? For millennia now. So so I was just in a place of real like, I don't know what my work is going to be now. I don't know. I can't go back and do these retreats anymore. I was feeling really um, a certain degree of despair, about the conditions of the masculine and feminine dynamic playing out. And then one of my, I guess I would say, companions since childhood, who I call Grandmother Star, um, I started really praying with her, and she was like, why don't you paint again? Like, why don't you pick up your paintbrush again? Because you haven't done that in a really long time. It was like, and don't paint me small, like paint me big so you can talk to me. And it was, I hadn't
Wow.
painted figures at that point for probably over 20 years. I had been painting more abstract work, and I had been doing other um, kind of installations and, you know, conceptual art kind of stuff. And so I was like, okay, I'm not really super invested in what the art world thinks at this point. Like, I'm kind of done with it. So I just started painting, and my daughter Akasha, who's 5 at the time, she got really into it and would paint the bottom part and the undercoat, and I would paint the top, and they just started
That's
coming.
gorgeous.
So it was this collaboration with my daughter, and I really felt this true child energy of her that also just totally helped me let go of the art school conditioning around like, what are people going to think about this, and is this any good? And but these paintings came like I could hardly keep up with what wanted to come through, and I would wake up in the night and see what wanted to then happen, and I would see the eyes and I'd see the hands, and that would be, and sometimes the colors, and then they would just, because the process is such a dialogical one, they would come through. So after about 6 of them, then I got this sort of nudge like, well, you should maybe let people know you're doing this. And so I shared something about it, and then more came through, and it was like finally when I did the 13th, it was like, okay, they're done. This is it. This is the group. And then I was seeing them in a circle, and I was seeing people be able to go inside this circle and just rest, like be surrounded by the gaze um, of all these different faces of the Divine Mother in many different forms, and then I was like looking for places in Pittsburgh that had round walls. And I was like, where is there some place I can do this? And then one night, I was randomly searching for round structures and yurts. And then I came across this site for a tent that was called the Stargazer tent. That was this. And I was like, well, that's maybe that's it. So, so it came and we put it up on our friend Heather's farm, in Stanton Heights, and then put the banners in. And, you know, in that time, my partner Eric, who's a sound healer and musician, I wanted to create some kind of way to share the messages that came with the paintings, because each one had a message. And we collaborated to create a sound journey that was this whole kind of transmission. So the installation, as it became, was this very grassroots, like low tech tent that people could come to and listen to the sound journey and just pray and be held. And I didn't know what was going to happen with it, but now, so that was 2021 around the solstice. Since then, it's been to several states and hundreds of people have been in it.
Wow.
And what I've learned from the experience is that she wants to be hosted by people that want to provide her to the community. And that there is this medicine that I had not formulated for myself, but that people would talk about, which is having a space for the inner child or the divine child to rest. Doesn't really exist in our culture. And I would say this is one of the casualties of rampant individualism, is there's no holding spaces for when we are separate individuals all the time. So this sanctuary or container for really prayer and receiving and speaking from your heart, and has been really beautiful. And what's felt like really clear to me is it's a service offering, and people can, they donate that, so it helps pay for the materials. But we always have, every time, some kind of intention for how this will support others in the community that are doing work, particularly for women and children. And so each time it's been up, there's been parts of the donations that go to the Midwife Center or PAR, or PAR has a program for supporting sex trafficking victims. Just several places that have been that are doing amazing work that we can give a little bit to. So it feels like it's very much been that. And so the banners are going to be going to Ireland in September. And hopefully it's looking like we're going to have a tent in Athens, Greece, where there's a place for some of the refugees coming from Palestine and Syria and Afghanistan, still into Europe, coming through Athens, where there can be a tent basically in the garden of where there's legal support for some of the refugees coming in. So
that's incredible.
I feel like it's kind of like we just sometimes follow the call. I don't know what this is, but I have to do it. And that's, at its best, I feel psychotherapy kind of provides that space for that, listening to what is calling. But Mountain to Mountain is very much a place where I feel like in service of helping us to remember this regenerative principle of the Mother Goddess, and doing that through creative collaborations and artistic experiences where people can actually drop in and be receiving what that may be. So rather than it being a theoretical transmission, more of an invitation, should someone feel called, to be able to come to awaken that energy within.
Mhm.
That's
It's
amazing.
beautiful. Yeah.
So we're, coming up on time. This feels like a really natural place to say goodbye for now, because there's definitely so much more that
We could talk about.
we'd love to talk about with you. Uh, in particular, I'm still very interested in because I know you've been on a lot of different, you've referenced different spiritual traditions, and I know you've worked in several different spiritual traditions, but the way that we as Europeans, you're laying the groundwork for, a revival, but practical ways that people can integrate, the little pieces that we have, because I know you have interest in, and we're all part of a circle that's still, deeply interested in, ways of bringing together group ceremonies, with different plant medicines, with different technologies that have been passed down. So maybe in part two, we can, if you're open, we can dive a bit into that realm together.
That would be beautiful. I'd love it. Yeah, there's so much to share in that. And I would be honored to continue the conversation. And I just wanted to say this is a little bit of a plug, but
Plug
Yes, please
away.
plug.
now in the
Please.
next month, it will have one more month left. This is where sometimes for me, this feels like, okay, this wants to happen now. And it's through me and it's through lots of people at this time, I think, tuning into how, these particular, our own indigenous traditions around the recognition that women, particularly as shamans, were in charge of maintaining ritual and ceremony to address harmony in the universe. And if we stop doing that, the world ends. It was always sort of like the idea, right? So recovering understandings and connecting with that lineage, connecting with those ancestors that are really not that far away, it turns out, when we journey, I think is a piece of where I feel very called. And just by chance and circumstance and a lot of generosity and goodwill, I was invited to put the original 13 Divine Mothers that are all life size, like they're 6 feet by, in the ticketing terminal of the airport in Pittsburgh. And so they've been
I
there
was gonna ask about
today.
that.
Yeah. And I think they're coming, they'll be there through early September. So if anybody wants to see those, but I just think Spirit has a sense of humor a lot of times because they're right next to the oversized baggage check. So as you're like checking your baggage, then there's this meditative space for it's really wild. But so if anyone wants to see the paintings, are there. And the prayer tent is also up right now. She's found a little semi-permanent home up in the space in Greensburg, where some community has built a place for her. And so that's if anybody would like to visit, you can just reach out to me. And yeah,
And we're going to post links,
okay.
whatever links you want to give us, we're going to post links to, connect with Denise's work. I'm thinking about, no promises, but I want to try to find a way while we're talking to post some of the images, but if that doesn't work, click on the link that we provide. And can people work with you one-on-one, Denise, virtually?
Yeah. And I'm going to be going into things kind of ebb and flow with how much space I have in the psychotherapy practice, but going into for sure the doorway of Samhain, and then into December, I'm going to be doing quite a bit of ancestral healing offerings for people.
Beautiful.
Because it's such a good time for working with supports around that, and the veil being very thin and the ancestors being very often available in different ways at that time. So if people are interested in exploring that, also can reach out to me through Mountain to Mountain or the Heartwalker Psychotherapy. I have an office at Sneha, which is a wellness collective in Pittsburgh, and you can come find me there too. We do have, I've been doing the Celtic Wheel of the Year here. So every
Beautiful
cross quarter and solar holiday, we've been doing a really very wise woman way introduction to a journey practice and working with the goddess that holds that part of the wheel in the pre-Celtic shamanic tradition of Ireland, and then working with ritual. So that piece of bringing it into the physical and having it be a community experience of not having the journeys just be a kind of like thing that happened in your mind, but actually, really bringing that into the physical, into reality, so we can dream it together with intention. So more to come on that. But if anybody wanted to jump in, those can be joined at any time. And then next one is the fall equinox with Macha. So
nice, beautiful. Well, thank you so much, Denise. Yeah, and we'll have links that you can follow in the bio, and hopefully very soon we will have another opportunity to sit with Denise here on Heaven and Earth.
thank you both.
Great.
So good to be with you.
Thank
Thank you, Denise.
Hey, bye.
Bye.